Welcome to Mojo Talks, where we explore the world through stories. I'm Mayur Channagere, visual storyteller and your host. So, welcome back to Mojo Talks with Mayur Channagere. This is the second edition of a conversation with Siddharth Raja. Siddharth, welcome back. And in a previous episode, we spoke a lot about law, we spoke about technology. I'm hoping this conversation today will be more on the softer side, which is what you do with on the other side of the fence, which is to do with Bangalore. To start with, what drove you to Nandi walks?
So, it's very simple actually. For that is a very easy answer. Because in 2010, 2011, as a family, we decided that we wanted to move our home away from the center of town. We used to live on Burley Street, not far from Ryan actually, and not far from the cemetery, right? Hosur Road Cemetery. We were down the road from Hosur Road Cemetery. Ryan had the advantage of overlooking. So he knew that his neighbors wouldn't disturb him, in a manner of speaking, right? But anyway, we wanted to move out because I was convinced, and I think the family was also convinced, that the center of Bangalore was increasingly going to become unlivable. Sadly, that thought or that prediction of mine has proven to be true, right? It is, right? For various reasons, pollution, of all types, traffic, waterlogging, etc. etc. So we moved to Nandi in actually December of 2013.
Oh.
The house got built in 2 years and we moved. Lock, stock and barrel. And while exploring the local area, because you're 60 kilometers north of Bangalore, I knew, of course, it was historically relevant. I chanced upon the Bhoganandeshwara temple, which, of course, is a gem.
Yeah.
And in those days, an undiscovered gem of Karnataka. Really, truly. For various reasons. I started reading about it, etc. And then in a few months thereafter, the summer or maybe early, the monsoon, 2014, I had this classmate of mine who said, hey, listen, if you've done this little research or whatever it is, why don't you take a group around, let's do a little walk? I said, that's a great idea. I said, sounds good. And also it kind of fulfilled something I've always wanted to do. So, his heritage, historical stuff is dear to my heart. If it hadn't been for the law, I probably would have done something in history, right? Purely. But as a profession, it doesn't take you much very far. So I started doing these walks there, the temple being the focus. And of course, the surrounding sites, the abandoned British cemetery at Sultanpet, the references to the Battle of Nandi Drug between Tipu and Cornwallis, and the railway station, not far away, that's a century old. Not far away is the home and the Samadhi and the museum of Sir Vishweshwaraya, MV.
No, not many people are aware of that.
No, you see, that has all changed in the last few years, especially post-COVID. Because of the sheer volume of information that's available, Bhoganandeshwara is no longer an undiscovered gem. It is still a gem, but now people are coming in droves. To some extent, it's a pity because the serenity of the place sometimes gets a little, jarring because of all of this. It's disturbed by the jarring nature.
The first time that I actually went to Bhoganandeshwara was almost close to about 10 years back. Right? And
it is a stunning piece of amalgamation. You see, in some respects, and I say this on the walk as well, the Bhoganandeshwara is a perfect example of the syncretic nature of Indian culture. Honestly.
True.
Of course, it is dominated by Hindu themes. It is, after all, a temple. A living temple. But the fact that different dynasties and different kingdoms have left their influence in terms of the architectural style and the modeling and the evocation, ultimately the iconography is also reflective of your thoughts. So Vijayanagara, Hoysala, Chola, Rashtrakuta, all of them have had influence there in some fashion or way of fashion, and that amalgamation, that it's an amalgamation.
So it's so
that's the key. That's precisely.
Right?
That's the syncretic thing I'm talking about. And then, I also say that, it's also a place where you have the Nandi village. Down the road, a kilometer away is the village of Sultanpet, which is a largely Muslim community. They've lived in harmony together for Sultanpet because it was named in honor of Tipu. Then you had the famous battle.
Battle there.
And then, of course, you have the influence of people like Sir M.V. and the princely state of Mysore, which followed Tipu. So all of that one led to the other, and I started doing this in 2014, all the way up to COVID, 5 years, 6 almost, right, up to 2020, early 2020. It was a fairly, I've done in excess of 100 walks in the area of all types, right? Documented. I've probably missed a few which I did for some select groups, but it's grown, and each of the narratives have improved. Obviously, I've learnt a lot more. As I tell people on the walk, I learn so much from people who come. You see, because they have their own perspectives, and people talk. There are counterpoints. Oh no, this is not the way it's supposed to be, so on and so forth, right? And I make it very clear that what has attracted me is the amalgamation that this temple is, and the architecture that it's such a thing of beauty by itself.
By itself, right?
There are a lot of people who come for a temple tour expecting to hear a lot about the iconography and the stories from our ancient scriptures, right? Which I very clearly tell them, listen, I have a handful of stories, maybe one or two, but I am no great authority on that. In fact, I'm probably one of the worst people who can talk about it, because I really, truly don't know too much. And some people ask, why haven't you learnt? Well, I have learnt a little bit, but what interests me is the architecture. And that amalgamation.
Again, you could actually, that would be a fantastic starting point to start exploring different architectural styles down south.
So
because it kind of brings everything together.
So one of the things that led me in 2022, I have not done it since because it's a tough act to pull off again, with the help of some friends of mine who run a travel agency in Pune, we did a small tour of about 7 or 8 people, 5 days, me leading, as in the guide, so to speak, through Hampi Vijayanagara. Nice. Now, it was my first time. I'd done 2-3 recce's before, but I wasn't expecting the kind of engaged group I have, and I must thank each one of them because they gave me a lot of very good inputs. It's a place where I can't do now a heritage walk without knowing my history relating to the Ramayana.
Yes.
Now, so I've been forced to do some more reading on that. I haven't done a walk since.
But again, even if you look at Hampi, there's a style on one side of the river, and you cross over, there's a different style.
Although I haven't done much on the other side. You're right about that. Yeah. That's true. The Tungabhadra, by the way, the other thing about that area, not far from the main sites, maybe about 25-30 kilometers away, is the Dolmen sites. There is senior moment. I can't remember the name of the place. It'll come back to me. But not far on the other side of the river, there is an ancient pre-Hindu settlement going back maybe 3,000 years or 3,500 years, right? On top of the hill. I'll tell you the name. I have to search for it.
There is a settlement near Hampi. Community Kadam.
Illala. It's a defunct place. It's got dolmens. It's got, there are stone walls and stone roof, just like that. Small structures.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll come back to me. The name will come back to me. So, there is a lot in that area. Even further. Even further. Anyway, the name it'll come back to me. It's a senior moment. It'll come back to me. But coming back to the point on the tour, I did the tour, realized my shortcomings. Also, there was some things there that were very interesting. I would love to do that. This was actually, by the way, you were asking about how my experiences at Bhoganandeshwara can be replicated elsewhere. In correct. Other places of syncretic nature.
Yes.
Oh, for sure. I fully agree. My only excursion into non-Nandi, so to speak, has been in Hampi. I've, of course, done heritage walks in Bangalore. I mean, a handful in Cubbon Park in particular. And I keep doing that ever so often because it's interesting. But there are others who do it. And as I tell the community, we're all part of the same community. We're all...
Yeah.
In fact, we need more of such people, you see. And
that goes back to a point of, we spoke earlier about
memorializing. Correct. Especially micro-history.
Micro-history.
Because see, ultimately, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the history of the village of Nandi and the temple that exists.
Correct.
It's a really small microcosm of a much wider picture.
Picture.
We often get told and read only about that wider picture, not some things like this. Yeah. So heritage walks like this in specific areas, geographic areas, are of a great value because they bring out the local. Yeah, the local nuances, the local stuff. And I'll tell you why my inspiration, if you want to call it that, for this was, again, over a decade ago, almost 15 years ago, we did a cruise down the Danube. And that cruise started in Budapest, the Hungarian capital, where on one Sunday morning we were free, and I happened to chance upon a flyer at some local pub which said, there's this lady. She works in some government department, and on Sundays she does this walk of Budapest through the communist era monuments that still exist, and there are certain places. So meet at certain place. It's a 2.5 hour walk, blah 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 blah, and it'll end up at some pub. Cost 0, right? And she said it also when we started off, saying, "I'll do this if you like it. I will literally keep a hat open at the end, and you put whatever you feel is a good price for what I've given. Don't give me coins, that's all. Give me something, as in give me a note at least. Right? Whatever it is. Fair enough. I think we paid her about 30 euros or something like that, because it is that. About 15 people. She did a wonderful job speaking about all of these monuments from her perspective of having lived through communism and the communist government of Hungary in the 1980s. She must have been in her 30s or 40s. Yeah. Right? And it came with that personal touch and element. Then I said, you know what, this is exactly. And a few years later, we moved to Nandi. I said, this is the microcosm. She was talking about, I'll give you an example. Believe it or not, in that Central Park, one of the many Central Parks, I should say, right next to, in the heart of Budapest, in Buda, not Pest, on the one side of the Danube, is a large park surrounded by the Russian embassy, which was then the Soviet embassy. You had the American embassy and one more, French, I think. So you had all of them confronting each other. And as you walk through this park now, there is a statue, believe it or not, of Ronald Reagan. Okay? I said, wow. But then she was telling me that for them in the 1980s as Hungarians, Ronald Reagan was their best hope, because he was the one pushing the communists to the corner through his rhetoric. He might have been an American, he may have his own interests, all of that. But ultimately, she said, most of us youngsters in those days who were trying to get out of this mad communism that we were under, looked to him as our savior. And he helped bring the end of communism, which is true. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so whatever you say about him, he has to be celebrated, because he's the one who first opened up the East. Hope. Exactly, opened up the Eastern European countries to the benefit and the hope of, what was there in the West. And so that microcosm, by the way, that micro-history, really started getting me thinking about how we can do it over here. And that's, I think, the crucial thing. Wherever I do these walks, whether it be at Kaban Park, which is what I've done, whether it be at Nandi or in Hampi. I've also done, by the way, heritage walks that's a more private, members-only heritage walk for members at the Bangalore Club through the Bangalore Club.
Oh, okay.
You see? That also is a very interesting...
You can just talk about Bangalore Club and history itself.
Yeah, that's a lot of history about that as well. These have all been small little history, and I always draw the larger connection. The idea is that, I'll give you an example again. One of the presidents of the Bangalore Club, old presidents, his name was Major General Teddy Norton, Edward Felix Norton, okay, military officer obviously, who was president of the club in 1939, just before the Second World War, right? The minutes of the Bangalore Club record that Major General Teddy Norton, as he was called, nickname Edward Felix, was the president when the committee decided to allow women into the main clubhouse. They were not permitted beyond the oval lawn that exists in front of the main clubhouse. Of course, when he said permitted women, of course, you have to make it very clear we're talking about English women.
English women.
Right.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. English women.
Yeah. So they were first permitted into the clubhouse only in 1939 when Teddy Norton was president of the Bangalore Club. Now, okay, that's a fairly significant thing for Bangalore Club, but what is this Teddy? What other things did Teddy Norton do? It turns out that Teddy Norton was a mountaineer.
Okay.
Right? And was the leader, the colonel or whatever, the commanding officer in charge of the mission, the attempt to scale Everest. In 1924, the famous Irvine Mallory edition.
Correct.
Right? He was their commanding officer, right? And a mountaineer himself. They, of course, died on the summit or near to the summit. Now, of course, we will never know whether they died on the way up or on the way down. Right? Because history doesn't record that. Poor old Irvine and Mallory were found years later, their bodies perfectly preserved, sadly having died from all accounts, from whatever the position they were found in, from all accounts after they had summited the top of Mount Everest in 1924. Right? But history doesn't tell us what. But anyway, so Teddy Norton was their commanding officer and held the record for the highest ascent. Of course, he never went to the top. In 1933, highest ascent on Mount Everest without the use of oxygen. And that record was not beaten until 1978. So here you have this 6'3". You should see the photographs of the man, 6'3", huge burly guy, right, who was president of the Bangalore Club for a short period of time that he was serving in Bangalore, right? And opened the main clubhouse to women, and incidentally was this well-known fact.
There's always a connection.
So there's always some connection, absolutely. You see? Yeah. And there are several connections to Bangalore as a result because of all these officers were all... And I like to draw those connections, you know. Obviously, you had several well-known officers of the cantonment of Bangalore who were presidents of the Bangalore Club, you know, obviously. So, for instance, you have the guy who brought piped water into Bangalore from Shivasamudram. That Kaveri water scheme, right, is a gentleman called Hutchin, right? McCutcheon, actually, his name is, a Scotsman, who was the president of the Bangalore Club. Now, eminent Bangalorean. There are several like that. So, you see, that point I'm making is that even...
this thing.
Yeah, and that history, even in the Cubbon Park, for instance, you know, this is, of course, to my own area of interest, right? Just next to the Century Club today is a cordoned off area that is a dog lovers area.
Dog park, yeah.
The dog park. If you know Priya Chetty Rajagopal, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
and she's the one who's the Maitradi for that. You know, she makes sure that we have a dog park, which is, I think, a great idea.
I mean, that's one of our favorite spots. When we go to Century Club, the kids love to go there either before breakfast, spend some time.
The dogs, eh?
Yeah.
So now, in that dog park area, there is a stone bench, okay, which is still there, sadly in broken down condition, which is called, it has lettering. It's a semicircular, it's a circular bench.
Part which has become semicircular.
Yeah, part of the circle is gone. So that circular, it's in marble, in granite, I beg your pardon, around the base of a tree. And on one side, you have the etching. It says Lady Banerjee's seat. Okay? A reference to the wife of one of the divans of Mysore, who, Lady Banerjee, went on to become one of Bangalore's leading socialites. She was the light of every party.
Wow.
You know, so if you thought that page 3 was something new. It happened in the 30s.
Right? And it was now that name and the person is...
There, it says Lady Banerjee's seat. Now, there's a whole history behind that, by the way. The whole history behind largely the foundation of the Century Club. So there's a historical, much wider history. Why was Century Club created? Because Indians were not allowed into the Bangalore Club. So the elite of Mysore, namely Vishweshwaraya and his buddies, got together and said, went to his Maharaja and said, sir, ನಮಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ
ನಮ್ಗೆ
ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕೊಡಿ.
ಮೈ ಕಬನ್ ಪಾರ್ಕ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು allocate an area to us, let us create a club, which is why you have the bust of the Maharaja, for instance, in the Century Club. I'm not a member of the Century Club, but I like going there because it has this very close and typical Mysore connection, the old princely Mysore connection. Lady Banerjee, whose husband was Albion Banerjee, was Diwan of Mysore, and the president of the Century Club. After Vishwesharaya and Kantarajars, he was president of the Century Club.
Oh, okay.
Right? So, it's a little history connection, right? They lived, by the way, from what I understand, they lived in an old bungalow somewhere down, I think it was number 1 Langford Road, maybe somewhere there, which is basically one of the roads, Langford Road, next to what is today the hockey stadium. You know, so they lived there.
Okay.
Right? And as I said, Lady Banerjee continued to be in Bangalore and was a well-known socialite. You know, because she was, well-to-do, had a very proud lineage. Her father was a member of the Secretary of State for India's Council, so and her husband was a former Diwan of Mysore. They got estranged, by the way. Okay. They separated. But anyway, that's another story. So that's just fascinating, right? See, ultimately, the problem, and if I can draw a larger connection over here, the problem with our history telling in our textbooks in particular is that it's a long list of dates and events. So-and-so came to power on so-and-so date, fought this battle on XYZ date, got killed on this one date, and then, move on. Right? This just takes the joy out of everything. No? There's a story to be told. You have to tell a narrative. Ultimately,
it's all about storytelling.
Yeah, and coming from a family of thespians, with uncle and aunt both, actors in Bangalore, theatre artists, it's a good thing to tell a story. You have to weave a little. Now, some people have told me, saying, boss, some of the stuff that you say I think is pushing the boundaries of truth. I said, it's okay. Art does push the boundaries of truth.
And if you can get people interested, at least a starting point and trigger point for people to dig deeper to know, I'm okay
I agree.
with it.
Absolutely. Especially younger folks.
Especially younger folks.
And by the way, I do this. I haven't done it lately, but I've done several tours for schools. and mostly schools. But whether they come back or not, it's tough. And there's one thing that I've always, it hasn't happened, I must admit, is that there should be an engendering of the local population to do. So in Nandi, for instance, at some point in time when I get the chance from all the hundreds of other things I do, is to have a training program for locals, youngsters, youth, to do some of this guide work, train them to do it. Especially, by the way, in Kannada and Telugu.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. I have a friend, Anand, who was a Bangalorean, now moved to Uttarakhand. Okay, and he's based in Kalap.
Right.
Now, Kalap is a place which is cut off from the world. No roads. Back then, about 10 years back when he moved, there was no electricity, no mobile network. He moved there, he started this trust, but also at the same time started conducting treks around the region, thereby training the local women and men to cook,
there you are.
to conduct. And now many of these...
So you have an ecosystem that builds up. Yeah.
And now they are conducting these treks and
That's
trails.
the point.
And what's so impressive was... What I love about the whole model was, especially during the pandemic, when the COVID hit, they were untouched until one Delhiite decided to run away from home because she was fed up with her mother screaming at her, and she went there.
And was infected. But then this ecosystem and the network came in handy to start the treatment. To disperse. Where is this in Uttarakhand?
It's about 250 kilometers from Dehradun.
Up in the mountains.
Up in the mountains, and it's beautiful.
I can imagine.
The canvas that you saw of the Buddha, that's from there. So that's you're rightly said. So you start something you never know.
So
what
that's
it
a
was.
dream, by the way, but it needs a lot more dedicated effort. And frankly, it's on my kind of to-do list. It's there. I know it's one of the things we should do, because ultimately you have to engender more people to do this.
Sid, just coming to the point, right? Like with your profession, with what you're doing with history, the Nandi walks, the Bangalore walks, you also are involved with the academia, with a lot of organizations like BIC. Can you want to share something about what you do there and how this can help professionals? One is the networking part of it, etc. But in terms of away from the networking part of it, there's so much more to be learned.
So let me begin by talking a little bit about the Bangalore International Center, where I've served on the board and the executive committee for several stints. A couple of stints on the board. I'm currently on my second or third stint in the executive committee, which is like the operational committee for the Bangalore International Center. And also this year, 24-25, I'm on the program committee and the chairperson of the program committee. Now, I think, first of all, it is, I think, important to describe the Bangalore International Center in two ways. One, that it is a privately funded public space, right? Or privately supported public space. And as a result of it being privately supported, but a public space, it is a free to use and enter facility. Membership is therefore not exclusive. It doesn't exclude people, right? And to some extent, the idea behind the Bangalore International Center is to tell Bangaloreans of all hues, newer Bangaloreans, older ones, people who are third or fourth generation, along with the people who came day before yesterday, right? That as a city, you must support such public spaces that are, and that's my second point, that are committed to providing a platform for all different kinds of events and programs. Cultural, theater, art, music, dance, intellectual discussions on topics of relevance, historical talk to bring, issues being examined, events that are themed on new books that may have been released, conversations with authors, conversations with international, luminaries. We've had, for instance, Nobel laureates come through, so on and so forth. So it's a public space that affords this platform for this kind of informed discussion and some, truly invigorating performances, whether it be music or, whatever.
And I think we need more such spaces.
Absolutely, because you have to cater to a wide range of interests, right? And as I said, it's free to enter, right? And to some extent, Bangaloreans must say that by becoming a member, and to some extent you can treat this as a pitch for the Bangalore International Center, because we do need more Bangaloreans to sign up.
Correct.
There's a small joining fee and a few thousand rupees every year as subscription, because I think you should see it as give back to Bangalore a little bit of what Bangalore has enabled you to do.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So it's not a quid pro quo. Oh, if I become a member, what benefits do I have?
No.
I mean, there are some. For instance, you get a discount on food bill and drink bill.
But even the place is so beautiful just to go and sit there and have a cup of coffee.
Exactly.
In that hustle bustle, the minute you enter,
absolutely,
it's suddenly kind of, it's been beautiful.
And there are different, it has, and thanks to Bijoy of 100 Hands, who is the architect, done a superb job. There are different spaces. There's a gallery, there are boardrooms, there are seminar halls, there is of course the main roughly 200 seater auditorium, and then there are public foyer and the spaces there. We've had all kinds of exhibitions. We've had sari exhibitions, and people coming in with craft and things like that. Now, the only thing that the Bangalore International Center doesn't have is, weddings and receptions.
Thankful for that. Thankful for
that. So there's a certain amount of curation that occurs. But it is really that, and it is unlike the India International Center, where many people become members of the India International Center in New Delhi because it's an exclusive club and it's largely the who's who of Delhi society, including the bureaucrats. And because it's exclusive, everyone else is kept out. And you can network and try and gain some advantage in the circles in Delhi. That's not what it is. Of course, you may well end up rubbing shoulders sitting next to you with a Ram Gua.
Exactly. I was just about to say that.
You know, other folks, you know, dropping by and sitting next to you or having a conversation. But that's all part of.
That's the beauty of the place, isn't
And
it?
it's a beauty. Sorry, apologies. So it's also, by the way, reflective of the ethos of Bangalore. You see, we talked about it earlier. You know how neighbors could meet freely, have a conversation, have a drink, have a meal, whatever. In our busy lives, that has reduced. This is to try and recreate some of that.
And
over interesting stuff.
And not only that, you know, there is always I mean, I still remember when I was a kid, my grandfather, who was the chairman of Vaishya Bank, you know, the kind of people who would come and have conversations. Of course, I was a kid, but at least now on the hindsight, when my parents or my uncles speak about it, they're like, oh, you know, we could just walk across and meet so many such people like Mr. Guha. That has changed over a period of time. And then there is this whole thing about accessibility. Oh, you got to know the person.
No.
But that is not the thing.
It is entirely an institution aimed at demolishing some of these walls and some of these constructs on class and caste and all of that. It's really truly an open space. And the programs lend itself to that. We've had all kinds of programs. We are now, Bangalore International Center is now doing in excess of 500 programs a year, right? And this is apart from people who take the venue and rent it out for their programs. I mean, the kind of programs are mind-boggling. And, you know, all of that repository is available on YouTube and on the Bangalore International Center's website. So to some extent, it's also part of that memorialization, that record.
That record of...
you know, that, by the way, if there is... I'm sorry, I know I'm digressing a bit, but technology does have that amazing ability to be able to have that repository, central repository. It's easier to create, isn't it?
Yeah. And
you know?
It's a good start.
Absolutely.
It's a good start. You know, it's somewhere we've kind of started realizing the value of history and documenting, and then hope it just grows.
Absolutely, because the Bangalore International Center is now roughly about 15 or 16 years old, and in the new premises, which is its own premises, since early 2019. So it's about 5.5, 6 years almost. And clearly it is a much sought after place. Being in the program committee, I can tell you that we are buffeted by hundreds of proposals from all kinds of people. Some of them good, some of them very good, some of them mediocre, some of them perhaps rank bad. But as the committee also says, listen, we give a platform to a lot of people. You and I were chatting before, saying that, you know, some of these, especially younger artists in the visual arts or the performing arts, right? You know, whether it be a theatre or whether it be, you know, Bharatnatyam, Kuchipudi, whatever it is, use this. They must see this as maybe a stage on which to improve and collaborate.
Collaborate, and you might find the next rising star.
Exactly, absolutely. So you have all the well-known guys and all the folks who come there who are well-known, but you also have these people, you know, and the center is now, I think, deeply committed to that, clearly. It's got a good executive team. Vikram and his team are excellent, the director and his team, and supported by a very conscientious and a very knowledgeable and proud Bangalorean board, I would say, you know, and happy to be involved in this because there's certainly more to be done.
And it's kind of gives you a sense of fulfillment of giving back.
Exactly. Which, by the way, also happens when I do some of my teaching. I have always had a passion for things academic in the sense of teaching and researching, etc. So I've done a previous stint of full-time teaching, really, about a decade ago, when I took some time out from the profession before coming back. So that continues to engage me. Of course, it's law teaching, largely, whether it be at my alma mater or at the law school in Jindal University in Delhi or elsewhere. I've done several courses and sessions elsewhere. It's very, what should I say, it keeps you on your toes. You have to keep reading, you have to keep up abreast, keep thinking of new ideas to talk about. new
Keeps the
sources.
mind fresh.
Keeps the mind active and
Active and
fresh.
fresh.
You're right. And it's always interesting to interact with, young students who are,
Ask
who
you the
bring a
tough
different
questions.
perspective. Sometimes they do, not always, I must say. Because this numbing effect of the social media is seen most visibly in many classes, sadly, because it has its negative impacts. Deleterious impact in terms of the way in which students perceive and receive what they're being taught. It's become too consumerist. It's this, I'm here as a student, I've paid for it, therefore you serve
I
me.
demand it.
It's customer is king, right? It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. So that element is there.
It's
Thankfully,
into
it can be managed, of course, like with everything else. So the academia is certainly something which enables me. But more, I think, as I look at it, as I keep doing courses and whenever I get the chance, full courses, it gives me the chance to also think of new areas to do some more research. So part of my few activities in the last year or so have been to develop some of these threads, but largely in the law, commercial law. But it's useful and interesting, I think, because we are touching upon aspects that have relevance in the real world. So to give you an example, we've been doing a rewrite and a revised edition of one of India's leading textbooks on company law, which has kind of not been done for the last 7 or 8 years. We are close to finishing that. I am the one responsible for not finishing it. I still have to give some stuff in. But there's a lot of work that's happening there, which kind of refreshes the textbook on Indian law, which is a good thing, I think, for students. And there are certain other things that I'm doing over there. I also do courses on business law in general for some of the students, the management students out at IIM Bangalore. In fact, I have a class on the coming Friday.
nice.
Right, to the executive MBA program about business law. But that's actually a more interesting conversation because it's cross disciplines, right? It's me, the lawyer, and then everyone out there in the audience, the class are all business guys. They're either chartered accountants or business analysts or techies or whatever they may be. Right? So it keeps the mind a little active and fresh. And it's also, I think, one of the issues that I've been focusing on of late is the need for a close integration, and this is really truly interdisciplinary, or should I say an integrated approach towards the teaching of commercial law subjects with a practical bent or orientation. Right? That is, you learn your basics, which every lawyer in this case must know, but what is the reality of the practice of the law that should feed into academia and vice versa.
Interesting you should again say this because, see, when I did my MBA in London, the course structure was very different. It was all practical. You do your theory, etc. And then you come back. And me being the youngest in the course back then, all of them came from the industry experience, right? And for me, it was a very different experience because here we are, in our education system, we have fed theory.
You're in your little ivory tower.
Right? And I'm so glad when you mentioned that, it's that practical.
But can I tell you something, that ability to bring the practical element into the classroom is easier said than done. Yeah. Because it cannot only be achieved by getting practitioners to show up at a class.
They should also be good storytellers. They should
be good storytellers, and there needs to be coordination at an institutional level. I'll give you an example again. If I am to teach company law, right, the institution should say, listen, we want a practical input in the following areas, or we will only require inputs in ABCD, because ultimately, as I tell people, not everything that can be learned can be taught.
True.
Right? You have to learn something through that experience of it, right? Correct. Academia and practice is always a balance that needs to be. The way to do it is to get good academics, confident in their abilities, in a room along with good practitioners, humble in their abilities, and because otherwise there's a power equation. Yeah. The practitioner is always seen as superior than the academic, which is unfortunate, right, in our country. Terribly unfortunate.
Terribly,
For
yeah.
a country that claims that, we have this great Guru Shishya tradition, that academics after a point in time are fairly disregarded.
Which
you
is,
know?
yeah, which is really sad.
I mean, what is this Guru Shishya tradition then,
Not
we
just
talk about
that, but-
Dronacharya and how he taught X and taught Y. I mean, if it hadn't been for him, he wouldn't have had a good archer, right?
You would have had a lot of things.
Right? So point being that the Dronacharyas of the world are few and far between. The junior professor at any institution, academic institution, is naturally at a disadvantage when you bring some practicing doctor or lawyer into the room.
I mean, if you just take the Dronacharya example, yeah, he taught people one-to-one, but at the same time, they were people like Ekalavya who learned not just by observing,
Precisely.
just by listening the stories. So a good teacher,
Yes.
a guide with that balance is very important.
It is very important, except that you will have these outliers, and Eklavya is an outlier, in my opinion, right? But the traditional constituency, the students, must benefit from some amount of a tension between academics and practice, for sure, but not one which is weighted in favor entirely of practicing lawyers, in this case. Because otherwise, you'll get a skewed picture of what your principles ought to be, legal principles, which are critical. Right?
Correct.
And you'll start dissing your professors. Saying, "Arey boss, what are you teaching me? It's better that I get taught by X and Y lawyer because he knows the real world. You're teaching me some ivory tower, BS." Right?
So awesome, Siddharth. I mean, thanks. This has been a very interesting conversation. We spoke about history, we spoke about the ethical boundaries, technology, legal. I don't know. I mean, when we started the conversation about having this I don't think we did, at least to be honest, on my side, I didn't think this conversation was going to lead to so many topics about Bangalore history to law to the academics.
All I can say, to that is, certainly you're right. We've had such scattered discussions and chat explorations today that, I think this is perhaps what you call it, a reflection of the current day and age where, there's such a rush to specialize, right? I don't want to say it, but that unfortunate phrase that, you're the jack of all trades but the master of none. That's an unfortunate phrase
correct.
because I think you can be the jack of all trades or at least large areas of interest and yet hold some commanding presence.
Correct.
I think that's the key
And
to
there's
it,
a lot to be learned. And there is this cross-functional learning that happens by talking. I mean, it's
It is.
good. It's
Can
good.
I just end by mentioning something I do in class, talking about this ability to have a broad range of interests and not focus so sharply on doing only one thing that you become boring and a real pain. Boring is the right word. There is a clip that I sometimes show my students in class, and that is to talk about, it's basically I talk about two things, about what a professional does, and more importantly, the ability to be able to master several aspects of the law, not just the one that you're focused on. So if you're a litigator, you need to understand commercial law. If you're a commercial lawyer, you need to understand various other areas of law. The one clip that I show them is of an interview given by a senior doctor who was the chief of anesthesiology at the Parkland and West, the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas in November 1963, when President John Kennedy was wheeled in after having been shot. And he was leading the team to try and revive the president, right? It's a fascinating subject about how you can be a professional across different fields, how you can maintain dignity, how you can maintain your calm when you have the president bleeding to death, if not already dead, on your table, and how you remain professional, and how you're able to marshal the team. Different areas, the one thing that stood out for me, and I, really will end on this by saying, his ability to pick factual details. Of course, it's seared in his memory. This is not some ordinary person lying on the table. This is the President of the United States who's just been shot. But his recollection of the facts, regardless of the importance of the historical importance of the day, crystal clear description of the way in which they inserted the tubes to get him to breathe through the lung machine, the way he was breathing, his eyes being bloodshot, his hair being drenched in blood, that how they had to cut the clothes off to put the tubes in, how they got doing all of that. His attention to detail, but also sympathetic to the whole situation, because he quickly realized that this was a dead end, right? And I say this...
And remaining calm.
Remaining calm and super professional about it, I say that this is what a lawyer should be. You need to be not a jack of everything. He's not an expert in all of it, but he knows what to do, right? And he knows which other doctor is required. Oh, I need the cardiologist. We have an issue to deal with, which is super critical. I'm the anesthesiologist. I'm getting him to breathe. That's my first objective. We need the neuro guy. We need everything else. I understand physiology. I may be a anesthesia, but I understand physiology like the back of my palm, right? I know exactly what it takes to be able to breathe. What are the signs of a dying heart, of a dying person? All those kind of things. It's absolutely brilliant. The fact that I'll tell you one last description. He says his eyes were suffused, right? Which is basically bloodshot eyes like that. And he had this agnate breathing, right? The president, by the way, because he'd been shot in the head, right? His breathing was... That's a dying heartbeat.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
There's a jerk in the hand. He's breathing with his jaw. You see? Now, to remember that, and immediately realize there's some other problem, because basically the wound was here. It's gone. He'd been shot through the head, right? Yeah. I mean, if he was like you or me without any flock of hair, they would have immediately found out. But he had a huge, thick hair, right? And they realized that this part of the brain was missing. Anyway. But it's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Great conversation.
Huge, wide range of topics. I hope it's all not too scattered.
But I think it's good. I mean, it's sometimes, like you said, right? Sometimes you need to have a wider perspective, discussions to learn, to stay abreast and be a better person.
Yeah, and more power to you. Yeah, we must do more of this with more people. Let's enrich this experience for, in particular, for the better interests of Bangalore.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And its people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Siddharth today, and do come back for more. This is Mayur signing off.